Austin, Texas. Some places don't change not because they shouldn't, but because someone inside them refuses to move on. Margaret Halbrook's living room was one of those places. The floral sofa still faced the same corner of the room. The bookshelf still held her husband's favorite mystery novels. And the curtains, ivory and delicate, still danced slightly in the afternoon breeze like they did on that day. The day everything vanished. It had been 16 years. Yet every October, as the leaves turned amber and the air thinned with autumn's hush, Margaret performed the same quiet ritual. She sat alone in the fading light, her trembling fingers wrapped tightly around the remote control. She didn't turn on the news to learn anything new. She turned it on to remember, to hope, and to grieve. The screen flickered to life, and there it was again. The photo. That same photo burned into her dreams. Jim Halbrook stood tall, a man with a dentist's hands but a carpenter's heart. His thick mustache barely masked a grin that could melt winter from the coldest day. Beside him, their daughter Lucia, only 8 then, beamed with a missing front tooth and a blue handbag swinging proudly from her shoulder. The red 1979 Cadillac DeVille shone like a ruby behind them, freshly waxed for the road trip that would never come back. Under the photo, the same haunting words every year, missing since October 1984. The air in the room changed. Margaret didn't blink, didn't breathe, didn't dare shatter the fragile silence between the past and now, and then the phone rang. She jumped. "Mrs. Halbrook," said the voice, official and calm, the way all policemen speak when they're about to say something that rearranges your life. "This is Officer Daniels with the Austin Police Department. A junkyard in San Marcos just called in a report. They found something. It may be related to your case." Margaret's fingers loosened. The remote fell to the carpet with a dull thud. She couldn't speak at first, just nodded even though no one could see her. I understand," she finally whispered. 10 minutes later, a black and white cruiser pulled up to the house she never left. Her mother, Doris, older now, her walk slower, her eyes sharper, sat beside her in the back seat as the car rolled south through the open Texas plains. Neither woman spoke. Words would have only gotten in the way of the storm building inside them. The patrol car slowed as they approached Harrow's Auto Salvage, a sprawl of rusted metal and forgotten machines. But today it was more than a junkyard. It was a graveyard, and something had clawed its way back to the surface. Crime scene tape fluttered in the breeze, yellow lines trying to contain a secret long buried, and then she saw it, the Cadillac. Or what was left of it, crushed, warped, half swallowed by rust like the earth had tried to digest it. But it was unmistakable, that tail fin, the gleam of the old paint beneath the grime. Margaret felt her knees weaken. She stepped forward. Slowly, as if approaching an open casket, her voice cracked as she pointed to a dent in the chrome rim of the rear wheel. "Jim hit a curb the week before. We laughed about how he kept babying the car. We were going to fix it." Her hand hovered just above the wreckage. "We never got the chance." Doris stood beside her, silent, pale as the clouds overhead. A detective stepped forward. His name was Ray's, soft eyes, firm hands. The kind of man who had seen too many mothers unravel. "Mrs. Halbrook," he said gently, "we believe this is the vehicle your husband and daughter disappeared in." "But how?" Margaret asked, not even realizing she'd spoken aloud. "How did it end up here?" The detective motioned toward a man standing at a distance. Thin, in his 30s, greasy overalls, nervous eyes. "Reed Caraway," the detective said. "Junkyard technician. He accepted the vehicle about a week ago." Margaret turned to him, searching his face for something: guilt, confusion, truth. "I didn't know," Reed stammered. "Some older man brought it in, said he didn't need it anymore. Paid cash, disappeared before I could log anything. Didn't even give his name." "What did he look like?" Detective Reyes asked. Reed frowned, thinking. Tall, maybe 6 feet, thin, gray hair, glasses, big mustache, wore khakis and a button-up. Spoke real soft, like he was afraid of his own voice. The world tilted sideways for Margaret. Her heart didn't pound, it stopped. "That sounds like Jim," she whispered. Her fingers gripped her mother's arm. "It sounds like him." But how? Jim had vanished 16 years ago. He and Lucia had left one Saturday morning and never returned. No note, no evidence, no goodbye. Now his car was here, and a man who looked just like him had brought it in. Alive. Doris stepped forward. "That's not possible," she said, almost pleading with the universe. "Jim's been gone for half my life. That can't be him." Margaret said nothing. She stared at the Cadillac, her eyes catching the last glint of sun off the twisted chrome. Her voice dropped to a whisper only her mother could hear. "If it was him, where is Lucia?" The junkyard search had stretched into late afternoon, revealing nothing but the skeletal remains of the crushed red Cadillac. No bones, no belongings, no Lucia. Margaret and Doris returned home in silence, exhausted, numb, as if grief itself had crawled into the backseat and refused to leave. That evening, as twilight spilled gold across the walls of their living room, Doris froze mid-motion, her breath catching. "My inhaler," she muttered, eyes wide. "I must have left it at the junkyard." Margaret moved to call, but the phone rang first. Reed Caraway's voice came smooth and familiar. "No trouble at all," he said. "I'll meet you at the yard, probably left it on my desk." Margaret hesitated. There was something too easy about him, too available, too quick to show up, but Doris insisted. "It's prescription," she said. "I'm not wasting another $50. So they returned. The junkyard at dusk was a different creature. Quiet, vast, the flattened Cadillac still wrapped in yellow tape like a half-forgotten grave. Inside the dim corridor of the office building, Margaret and Doris waited as Reed unlocked his private room. "One sec," he said cheerily, vanishing inside. That's when Doris leaned close, her whisper barely louder than breath. "Margaret, look in the cabinet top shelf across from the door." And Margaret turned her head. There it was, a blue handbag, tucked behind dusty manuals and old engine parts. Her heart stopped. Not similar, identical. The same sky blue vinyl, the same white trim, the same little clasp. Lucia's. The Barbie handbag she'd saved for, loved, never went anywhere without. "But it can't be," Margaret whispered. "He said his daughter lives in Houston." Reed returned, holding the inhaler, smiling with ease. "Found it," he said. Margaret didn't even hear him. Her eyes were still on the glass. "That bag," she said. "May I see it?" A flicker barely there passed through Reed's face, then a shrug. "Sure, take it. It's nothing. My daughter didn't want it." He handed it over. And in Margaret's trembling hands the past screamed. She opened it slowly, ran her fingers along the interior lining, found the tag burned, not faded, burned. The fabric puckered, the letters scorched away as if someone had tried to erase a name. "It's been tampered with," Doris murmured, horror rising in her voice. Reed only shrugged again. "She never used it." Margaret said nothing, just clutched the bag like it might disappear. The next morning they drove straight to Burnett Antiques. Mr. Keller brought out Robert, a specialist in vintage Barbie items. Robert examined the bag with practiced care, nodding as he worked. "Metal, early 1980s, he confirmed. "Rare, especially in this shade." He turned the tag under light. "This damage, this was done with heat. Intentional, I've seen it before. It's how people try to hide identifiers." Margaret's throat tightened. There was no doubt now, it was Lucia's. They left the shop with the bag wrapped in tissue and Doris holding it like an urn. "We're going to the police," she said. "Now." Margaret started the engine, but as they turned into traffic, something jolted. The brake warning light blinked red, the pedals sank, the engine hiccuped. Margaret pulled over, confused and scared. "It was fine yesterday," she whispered. Then headlights behind them, a truck rolled up. Reed stepped out again, smiling, waving. "Everything okay?" he called. "I was just driving by." Margaret turned to Doris. They didn't speak. But deep in Margaret's chest, a single cold realization took shape, clear as glass and sharp as fear. Reed hadn't just found them by chance. He had been following them. Reed and his companion Jason said they'd give them a ride, just to help, just to be kind, but the kindness didn't last. Somewhere between city lights and county lines, the conversation faded and the tone changed. The truck took a turn it wasn't meant to take. Then a gun, cold steel, two pairs of handcuffs. Margaret and Doris were no longer passengers. They were hostages. Bound and silenced, they were driven into the dark heart of the woods where the road narrowed and the trees grew close enough to whisper. At the end stood a decaying farmhouse, its bones sagging with secrets. A man named Micah guarded the front, not unkind but defeated. Inside there were others. Girls, women, silent and strange, their eyes vacant, their mouths unused to speech. Hollow shells, and then Margaret saw her. A woman in her 20s, thin as a whisper, scar just above the right brow. Long brown hair, the shape of her chin, the tilt of her head, familiar. Margaret didn't breathe. "Lucia," she whispered. Her daughter didn't respond, didn't blink. Didn't flinch, a ghost in living skin. Then came the man behind it all. They called him the boss. Charlie Carnes. His presence was heavy, slow, and sickening. He smiled like he knew things he shouldn't. And for his entertainment, he forced a game. He lined up 3 women, all nearly identical. "Pick Samantha," he told them, "if you can." And when both Margaret and Doris pointed to the same girl, the one with the scar, he laughed. Not in joy, but in cruelty. "So mothers really can smell their own blood," he mocked. Lucia, Samantha stood there, still, empty, her mother inches away but centuries apart. Then the monster made it worse. He ordered Lucia to undress Margaret, a test, a punishment, a desecration. Margaret screamed her daughter's name, Doris begged, but Lucia moved like machinery, obedient, soulless, broken. And just as the last thread of decency was about to be severed, the door burst open. Micah's voice tore through the room. "Police, outside." Chaos exploded. Charlie turned, furious, pulling a gun from his belt. Margaret braced for death. But Micah, tired old Micah, threw himself forward and took the bullets meant for her. 2 shots, chest, blood, and then the world cracked open. The door slammed again. Officers poured in, yelling commands, guns drawn, screams and smoke. Charlie tried to run. A bullet caught his leg, then his shoulder. He laughed even as he fell, drenched in pain and hate. Jason and Reed surrendered without a fight. It was over. In a single hour, 16 years of darkness unraveled. And in the middle of it all, Lucia still stood, motionless, as if the storm had passed around her but never touched her, as if her mind had been locked in a room even the police couldn't enter, but she was there, breathing, real, alive. That was all that mattered for now. At St. David's Hospital in Austin, the fluorescent lights hummed softly overhead, casting pale reflections on the sterile white floor. Nurses moved in quiet rhythms. Machines blinked. Doors whispered open and shut. But in one small room at the end of the hall, time stood still. Lucia Halbrook lay in the hospital bed like a ghost returning to her body. She was 24 years old, but moved like someone twice that. Her skin was pale, her eyes distant, her lips chapped from disuse. She hadn't said a single word since being brought in. The trauma was too deep, too old, too cruel. Margaret sat beside her, hands trembling as she gently brushed Lucia's hair behind her ear. Doris stood on the other side of the bed, whispering familiar stories about birthdays in Barton Springs, about the Barbie bag, about the smell of Jim's cologne on Sunday mornings. And then the miracle, Lucia's lips moved, barely, but the sound that came out was unmistakable. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, her voice like brittle glass. "I'm so sorry for being so broken." Margaret's heart cracked open. "No, baby, no," she said, tears breaking past her voice. "You're not broken, you are my daughter, you are Lucia, and you came back to me, that's all that matters. You are not broken, you are brave." Doris leaned in, gently taking Lucia's other hand. "You survived, sweetheart," she said. "You survived something monstrous, and now you're home, you're safe." The three of them sat there in that still room. The mother who never stopped searching, the grandmother who never stopped hoping, and the daughter who had been lost in the dark for 16 years but was now blinking slowly into the light. Later that day, behind closed doors in a quiet conference room, Detective Reyes told Margaret and Doris the full truth. It began, as so many tragedies do, with kindness. Jim Halbrook, a good man with a good heart, had pulled over on the side of a road near Marble Falls. Two people were standing there, one adult, one child. The older man introduced himself as Charlie. He said his son Reed was sick and they needed help. Jim, being Jim, offered them a ride, even booked them a second room at the motel in Lano. That night, Charlie drugged Jim's drink. And when the motel lights went out, he murdered him in the bathroom, leaving no trace. He told Lucia the next morning that her father had fallen ill, that he was in the hospital, that her mother had died in a fire. She was 8. She believed him. Charlie took her, moved her, hid her, changed her name to Samantha. Made sure she never stayed in one place long enough to be found. He used forged papers, changed her hair, rewrote her story, and bit by bit erased her past, except for the scars she carried in silence. And Reed, he helped. He was only 10 years old when it happened, manipulated by a monster molded into something complicit. For years, he helped Charlie stay hidden, disposed of evidence, erased names, scrubbed records. It was Reed who eventually moved the Cadillac. It was Reed who kept Lucia's handbag locked in his office. Maybe guilt lived in him, maybe fear, maybe both, but it was never enough to make him speak until fate forced his hand. As for Micah, he had known. He had watched it all unfold from the fringes of Charlie's twisted world. He had seen his son become a silent accomplice. For 16 years, he had kept his head down, swallowed his conscience, and looked the other way. Until two women, driven by grief, love, and unshakable intuition, walked into that junkyard and forced the past to rise. In a hospital bed down the hall, Micah lay wrapped in bandages. His chest was stitched where bullets had passed through him, his breath was shallow but his eyes were clear. When Margaret came to see him, he didn't ask for pity. "I don't deserve forgiveness," he said quietly. "I knew, and I did nothing." She sat beside him, her voice gentle but firm. "You saved my life, Micah, and you helped bring my daughter home. That's what matters now." He nodded slowly, tears filling his tired eyes. "I just couldn't let her become the next ghost." Margaret reached out, took his hand in hers, and squeezed it with all the grace a mother could muster. "You did the right thing in the end. That's what counts." Outside the window, the late autumn sun was setting behind the city skyline, casting streaks of orange and gold across the rooftops. The same sky that had witnessed 16 years of sorrow now watched a family stitch itself back together, thread by fragile thread. Back in Lucia's hospital room, she slept, peacefully, her breathing steady. A nurse checked her vitals, adjusted a pillow, then left with a soft nod. Margaret stood by the window, arms crossed, watching the horizon. Doris was seated beside the bed, humming a tune Lucia used to love, a lullaby from a time before monsters had names. 16 years of darkness, of unanswered phone calls, of missing posters faded by rain, of birthdays spent staring at empty chairs, of dreams haunted by questions and hollow mornings filled with silence. But now there was a beginning. Not an ending, not closure, not yet, but a beginning. The road to healing would not be straight. Lucia would need time, therapy, safety, love without conditions. But she wasn't alone anymore. She had her mother, her grandmother. And a name that belonged to her again. Lucia Halbrook. A child lost to the woods, found not by luck but by love that refused to die. One day at a time they would learn to breathe again, and maybe one day she would smile again. But for now, Margaret sat down beside her daughter, took her hand, and whispered the only words that mattered. "You're safe now, and we're never letting you go again."